I saw her standing alone at the edge of the coach station yard in Bracken Hollow just as the cold afternoon rain began to settle in. It wasn't the kind of storm that sent people running for cover. This was the quiet, stubborn sort, steady drops that soaked through cloaks, boots, and moods alike. The whole yard was slick with brown mud wheel ruts deep enough to twist an ankle, and the horses tied under the lean-to snorted and stamped unhappy with the wet. I was there because my small wood hauling cart had snapped an axle pin the moment I rolled in, and the station blacksmith told me it would take at least an hour to heat and mend the iron. My name is Alden Marr. I live alone on the western edge of town in a plain 2-room timber house set between a small vegetable patch, an old well, and a low-roofed stable. I make my living doing whatever needs doing, mending fences, patching roofs, hauling timber for coin, carrying mail on the long roads when no one else will, and taking any odd job the locals would rather avoid. I am not starving, but there is nothing about my life that would make another man jealous. It is quiet and narrow, just wide enough to carry me from one day into the next without expecting much more. So, when I first noticed her standing by herself in the rain, I should have simply glanced away and gone back to waiting for my cart like I always did. But something about her kept my eyes from moving on. She was an orc girl, slighter than most of the orc women I had seen in Border Tales. Not weak, only lacking the massive, frightening bulk that tavern stories usually gave her kind. She wore a travel cloak the color of wet ash, and beneath it, a dark green wool skirt already muddied at the hem. A small wooden traveling case was clutched tight to her chest with both arms, as if loosening her grip even a little would make it disappear from her life forever. Her hair was dark brown, tied low at the nape, but coming loose in damp strands from the long road. And her eyes, those eyes were what held me still. They were not simply tired. They were the eyes of someone who had just been pushed out of a door and still did not understand why she was standing in a strange place with nowhere left to turn. She spoke first her voice, softer than the rain tapping on the shelter roof. "Do you know anywhere cheap to stay the night around here?" I looked around the yard. Bracken Hollow had only one inn, a miserable place at the north end of the street where the roof leaked, the straw mattresses smelled of mold, and the drunken teamsters kept the noise going until dawn. "There is an inn," I answered honestly. "But I would not send you there unless you truly had no other choice." She let out a small laugh, more sad than amused. "Then, it is exactly as I expected." We stood in silence for a while. The rain continued to fall. A coach rolled out of the station, its wheels creaking away down the muddy road. For reasons I still cannot name, I asked, "Where have you come from?" She did not look at me right away. Her gaze stayed on the station gate, as if half of her wanted to walk back through it, and the other half already knew there was nothing left to return to. "My family sent me here to punish me," she said. I turned fully toward her. "Punish you?" She nodded her lips, pressing into a thin line the way someone does when they have repeated those words to themselves too many times on the journey. "They said I had shamed them, that I needed to learn to live smaller, quieter, more obedient. So they gave me just enough coin for the road, put me on the coach, and told me that if I truly felt ashamed, I should stay here until I understood my own worth." The words came out flat, almost without feeling. That was why the pain beneath them rang so clearly. I looked at the wooden case she clutched at her soaked boots, at the cloak heavy with rain, and at the way she still stood straight, even though the only thing left to hold on to was her own pride. Perhaps it was because I recognized what she was trying to hide. Perhaps because in my own life I had once stood under stares that told me I was nothing but a failure not worth mentioning. Perhaps because kindness sometimes arrives before thought does. I heard myself say, "Then stay with me." This time she turned and looked at me. Really looked. as if she were trying to decide whether she had just met a madman, a trickster, or a man foolish enough to mean what he said. "You do not even know my name," she said. "I am Alden," I answered. "And you?" She hesitated one beat. "Then Mireya." I nodded. "All right, Mireya. My card is broken. Night is coming, and the inn here is miserable. My house has an empty room, a warm hearth, and a roof that does not leak. If you wish, you can come with me." Mireya stared at me long enough that I thought I had spoken the most foolish sentence of my life. Then at last she tightened her grip on the wooden case and asked, "Do you often bring strangers home like this?" "No," I said truthfully. "Only when I see they truly have nowhere else to go." And right there in the cold, wet coach station yard, I knew my quiet life had just been stepped into by an orc girl I had never met before. The cart was finally mended just as the last light of day bled out behind the hills. I loaded the repaired axle, lashed the ropes tight, and motioned for Mireya to sit on the inner side of the bench where the wind would strike her least. She climbed up without a word, still clutching the wooden case to her chest like a shield. The whole ride back to my house, she spoke almost nothing. Her eyes stayed on the darkening fields, the wet grass bending under the rain, and the bare branches of the trees that lined the road. I kept my questions to myself. Some people need silence, the way others need air after they have been pushed out of everything they once knew. My house sits alone on the western edge of Bracken Hollow, far enough from the last cluster of roofs that at night you can hear the wind moving through the grass like breath. It is nothing grand. 2 solid rooms of heavy timber, thick walls, a roof of split pine planks, a front porch wide enough for 2 chairs, and a small side room. I had cleared out last winter when I realized I might one day need a place for a hired hand. The stable is low and snug. Beside it the well stands a few paces from the back door, and the vegetable patch runs along the south fence where the sun lingers longest. It is plain, clean, and warm if the hearth is fed. That was all I had to offer. When the cart rolled to a stop in front of the porch, Mireya did not step down at once. She sat there studying the house, the smoke curling from the chimney I had left banked the faint yellow glow behind the small window. The dark shape of the stable, the low fence, the quiet yard. Her gaze was not the look of someone accepting shelter. It was the look of someone trying to decide whether this was kindness or a trap, dressed in kindness. I jumped down, walked around to her side, and kept my hands at my sides. "You can take your case inside first," I said. "I'll put the cart away." She tightened her arms around the wood. "I can carry it myself, all right." I did not reach to help. I had already learned that Mireya met offers of help the way other people meet a stranger's hand reaching out of the dark, ready to step back first. By the time I had unharnessed the horse, rubbed him down, and given him grain, she was still standing on the threshold, not yet inside. She was memorizing the room, the long table. The stone hearth where the fire I had left was now only embers. The shelf of knives and bowls, the door to the side room, the back window with its heavy shutter. I stepped onto the porch and wiped my boots. "I don't lock the door at night," I told her. She turned her head. "You say that as if you want me to feel safe." "I say it because if you ever want to leave, you won't need to ask for a key." Something small and quick moved across her face. Not relief exactly, and not yet trust, only the first hairline crack in the wall she had built around herself. I went inside, stirred the fire back to life, and set a pot of the vegetable stew I had made at midday on the hook. While it warmed, I cut thick slices of dark bread, spread them with salted butter, and laid everything on the table. Mireya sat in the chair closest to the door, the one that let her see every exit. When I placed the bowl in front of her, she said at once, "I don't have much coin. I'm not asking for any. I don't want to be a burden. You haven't even slept here one night yet." She looked down at the steaming bowl. The heat rising from it softened the tight lines around her eyes. She ate slowly at first, as if testing whether the food would be taken away. When it stayed, she ate with quiet hunger. Not greedy, but the hunger of someone who had gone too many days measuring every mouthful. After half the bowl was gone, I asked, What did your family send you here? For Mireia was silent for a long time. I thought she would not answer. Then she set the spoon down. They wanted me to be something they could show off, she said, or at least marry into something useful for the family. And you refused. I walked away. A small bitter smile touched her mouth. My father wanted me to keep the ledgers for the merchant Varel. My stepmother wanted me to wed his son. I endured it for nearly 2 years. One morning, I stood in front of the stacks of parchment and seals and realized that if I stayed, I would disappear inside them. So I left, and they punished you by sending you here. They called it teaching me humility. I leaned back in my chair and watched the fire. Bracken Hollow doesn't teach humility. It only teaches people how to survive the winter on their own. Maybe that is what they wanted, she said, her voice dropping until it was almost lost beneath the crackle of the logs. To see if without their name and their money, I am still anything at all. I studied her across the table. She sat straight, but her fingers gripped the rim of the bowl as if it were the only solid thing left in the world. Here you don't have to prove your worth by being useful, I said. Stay a few days if you want. Stay the whole winter if you want. Or leave after one night. I won't stop you. Mireia lifted her eyes. For the first time, the wariness in them thinned, replaced by the exhaustion of someone who had finally heard a sentence that carried no price. That night I made up the bed in the side room, clean sheets, a wool blanket from the chest, and the extra lantern I kept for long nights. When I carried the lamp in, I told her, this door has a bolt on the inside. She stood beside the narrow wooden bed, one hand resting on the blanket I had folded back. After a long moment, she asked, You truly aren't afraid? I'll steal what I can and slip away before dawn. I shrugged. I don't own anything worth stealing. Besides, if you want to leave, I'd rather you walk out the door than climb through the window. This time she laughed, soft, brief, but real. It lit the small room brighter than the lantern flame. Later, when I lay in my own bed in the main room, I listened to the faint creak of floorboards as she moved behind the closed door. I did not sleep easily. I kept waiting for the sound of the bolt sliding back the soft footsteps, heading for the porch, the quiet click of the front door closing behind her. It never came. Instead, the house, long used to holding only one breath, began, for the first time in years, to hold two. The next morning, I woke later than usual, not because I was tired, but because I had lain awake half the night listening for the sound of the bolt sliding back and soft footsteps heading for the door. She had not left. When I stepped into the main room, the fire was already rebuilt and the kettle was simmering on the hook. The back door stood ajar to let the smoke out, and Mireia was at the table slicing the last of the dark bread into thin pieces. Her sleeves were rolled to the elbows, and she moved with the quiet certainty of someone who had decided the space was no longer entirely foreign. I couldn't find the honey, she said, as if my presence and her continued stay were the most ordinary things in the world. It's in the right-hand cupboard. She opened the correct door without hesitation, took down the small crock, and glanced at me over her shoulder. You sleep heavier than I expected. I thought you might be gone. Mireia paused, then set the honey on the table. I thought the same thing about myself. Then why are you still here? She looked out the window where the early light was still veiled in mist. Because last night was the first time I slept without waiting for someone to drag me awake with orders. The words landed between us like a stone dropped into still water. I did not know what to say, so I simply sat down and let the silence hold them. From that morning onward, our days began to find their own quiet rhythm. At first, I still treated her as a guest. I split the wood, mended the fences, cleaned the stable, and carried water while she took the smaller tasks, washing the bowls, folding the blankets, hanging clothes near the hearth to dry. But the longer she stayed, the more she slipped naturally into the empty places I had left alone for years. She washed the windows with warm water and apple vinegar until the light inside the house grew brighter than I remembered. She sorted the seed bags I had left in a jumble, tying neat labels to each one. She took my old wool sweater, the one with the threadbare cuffs I had worn to market for 3 winters, and mended it so neatly the patches looked like they had always belonged there. One afternoon, she mixed barley flour with honey and lard, rolled the dough thin, and baked flatbreads for the long road, something I had never thought to do in my own kitchen. "Where did you learn all this?" I asked one late afternoon while she tied bundles of dried herbs to the beam above the hearth with a precision I had never managed, in places where if I was not useful people made sure I felt unnecessary. "I never asked you to be useful." "I know." She said it simply, then went back to knotting the string. But I understood the problem now. Mireya did not know how to exist in a place where her worth was not measured by how much she could be used. By the second week, she began coming outside with me. At first, she only stood near the gate and watched me repair the fence. Then she carried posts, held the line taut, and picked up the nails that fell into the grass. One cloudy morning, I led the mare down to the ditch to drink, and Mireya followed without being asked. She laid her hand on the horse's muzzle before I could warn her. The mare did not shy away. I was more surprised than she was. You know horses. Not many. But horses and people are alike. In one thing, they both hate being forced. I laughed. That sounds like something you would say about yourself. Maybe it is. The conversations grew deeper without effort. They came while we worked side by side, while we ate supper, while the wind rose and we sat together near the hearth. I told her how I had lived with my father at the edge of the village until he died, and how I had moved to this patch of land, because I could no longer stand the way my relatives looked at me like an unpaid debt. She told me she had once loved learning letters and drawing maps of houses more than attending the family feasts. I said I did not mind solitude, only the feeling of being seen as someone with nothing good left to wait for. She said that feeling was uncomfortably familiar. Then one night, when the rain beat steadily on the roof and the world outside was nothing but darkness and water, we sat across from each other under the light of a single candle. Mireya spoke the thing she had kept closest since the day she arrived. My family did not send me here to teach me humility. I stayed quiet. They sent me here to find out whether without their backing I was still anything at all. I set my cup down. "And what do you think now?" She stared at the candle flame, the light catching the planes of her face and making her eyes look deeper than usual. "I think—" She hesitated, then continued, her voice low. "For the first time, I am doing something no one is measuring to see if it brings honor to my family. And for the first time, that makes me feel like I exist." The words stayed in the room long after the candle had burned halfway down. That night before she stepped into her room, she paused at the door and looked back at me. "If spring comes," she asked, "do you want me to still be here?" I had known the question was coming sooner or later. Even so, when it finally left her mouth, my chest tightened. "I do," I said. And in the moment I spoke it aloud, I understood that I was no longer only giving shelter to a stranger. Trouble did not arrive on horseback or with a knock in the middle of the night the way I had always imagined it would. It came in an envelope. One late afternoon near the end of winter, the village boy who delivered the post rode up to the fence and held out a thick letter sealed with dark purple wax. The moment I saw the stamp of House Varel pressed into the wax, I knew it was not good news. Mireya was out behind the house, digging the last of the winter turnips. When I carried the letter to her, her hands went cold before she even broke the seal. Inside were 3 sheets. The first was from her father, short, cold, and precise. He wrote that the family had cut off every last coin of support. If she did not return before the new moon and apologize to House Varel in person, they would declare her no longer part of the bloodline. She would have no claim to protection or aid of any kind. The second sheet was longer and came from her stepmother. It spoke of shame, of honor, and of how no Orc girl could live under the roof of a strange man without destroying what little reputation she still possessed. The third and shortest letter was from House Varel itself. It simply stated that if she returned and accepted her fault, the old betrothal could still be salvaged. Mireya read every word in silence. When she finished, her whole body went still. I stood a few paces away and did not reach for her. I had learned that some pain cannot bear to be touched while it is still raw. Then her hands began to tremble. The paper slipped from her fingers and drifted to the wooden floor. For the first time since the day she had arrived at the coach station, she cried. Not loud, not sobbing, just silent tears that ran down her cheeks as if the words in those letters had finally pierced the place she had kept closed for so long. They never meant to let me choose, she whispered, her voice cracking. No matter how well I live here, no matter how much I breathe on my own, to them I am still the one who must crawl back and apologize for daring to want a different life. This time, I sat down on the floor beside her. You do not have to go back. But if I do not, I will have nothing left. I looked at her, then at the house around us. The table where we ate every evening, the bundles of herbs she had tied above the hearth, the sweater she had mended hanging by the door, the second wooden cup on the shelf, the garden plot she had turned with her own hands only last week. You still have this, I said. Mireya wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and looked around as if seeing the room for the first time. That is not property, she said. No, I answered. That is a life. Her shoulders shook. I do not want to ruin it. You are not ruining anything. She lifted her gaze. Her eyes were red, but there was a strange, fierce light in them now. I came here because I was pushed, she said. But if I stay, I want to stay because I choose it. I gathered the 3 sheets from the floor, carried them to the hearth, and dropped them onto the flames. The wax melted first. Then the paper curled, blackened, and twisted, as though the words themselves were trying to escape the fire. Mireya stared, stunned. You just burned my father's letter. I did. You are truly mad. Maybe. Through the tears, she gave a wet, shaky laugh that sounded more beautiful than any sound I had heard in this house before. I moved closer until our knees touched. If you want to go back, I will not stop you. If you want to write an answer, I will carry the letter myself. But if you stay, then stay not as someone I am sheltering. Stay as someone who is choosing this life with me. She watched the last purple seal melt into nothing. Then she turned to me. Do you understand what that means? It means there will be more trouble than before. It means that if this place is ever taken from me, I will have no other home. I let out a slow breath. Then we keep it from being taken. Mireya looked at me for a long time. Then very gently she placed her hand over mine, not asking for help, not out of despair, but as the first quiet admission that this house and I had become something that truly mattered to her. Spring came slowly the way good things often do in Bracken Hollow. The ice in the ditch melted into brown water that ran clear by midday. Blades of new grass pushed through the mud along the fence line, and the chickens stayed out longer each morning, scratching at the softening earth. Inside the house, everything had changed in ways so quiet I almost missed them until I looked again. Mireya's cup no longer sat on the shelf as a guest's cup. It lived on the right side, next to mine. Her cloak hung on the 3rd hook by the door as though it had always belonged there. The small wooden traveling case that once waited beside her bed like something ready to leave had been pushed into the corner of her room. On its lid now rested a folded handkerchief, a wooden comb, and the small sewing box she had brought with her. It was no longer packed for flight. It was simply stored. The clearest proof came one bright morning when she opened the front door before I did. She carried a handful of seed packets and asked, "Do you want the new row of greens on the left side of the onions or the right? Not should I plant them. Not may I help. Just do you want?" As if the coming season already belonged to both of us. Still, one thing between us had not yet been spoken aloud. It lived in the small touches that lasted half a second longer than necessary. Her fingers brushing mine when she passed me the hammer. The way we both went still when I walked behind her in the narrow kitchen. The quiet evenings when she carried her blanket to sit closer to the hearth. without giving a reason. It lived in the way she watched me when she thought I was asleep in the chair and in the way I pretended not to notice. It waited until the last rainy day of the month. A small procession from the village passed along the road that afternoon, heading to the spring festival in the fields beyond. They saw Mireya working in the garden. No one called her the girl who had been sent here in disgrace anymore. She stood straight among the fresh-turned soil, hair tied back sleeves, rolled hands dark with earth, and her eyes were clear and steady. When the last of them disappeared around the bend, she came inside, closed the door behind her, and stood for a moment in the soft spring light that filled the kitchen. "If that first day at the coach station you had not told me to stay," she said quietly, "I would probably be back in my father's house by now, apologizing to people who never apologized to me, living the rest of my life inside the cage they chose. I set the hoe against the wall, and now I asked." Mireya stepped farther into the room. Sunlight caught the faint dust in the air and turned it to gold. She looked at the table where we ate every evening, at the herbs she had hung at the second chair that was now hers, at the garden she had helped plant, and finally at me. "Now I want to be here," she said. "Not until I find somewhere better. Not until my father forgives me. I want to be here because I want a home that has you inside it." My heart beat so hard I could hear it in my ears. I crossed the space between us and stopped close enough that she could step back if she wished. She did not step back. "Then stay," I said. "Not as someone I shelter. Stay as someone who belongs in this house with me." Her eyes shimmered. Only as someone who belongs in this house, she was giving me one last chance not to be a coward. I lifted my hand and touched her cheek. Her skin was warm now, no longer cold from the long road or the fear that had traveled with her. I felt the faint tremor beneath my fingers, but it was not fear. It was something alive and waiting. "And if you will let me," I said, "stay as someone who is mine." Mireya closed her eyes for a single heartbeat. When she opened them again, the look she gave me was one I knew I would carry for the rest of my life. "Maybe I already am," she whispered. The first kiss came slowly, soft and certain, the way spring finally arrives after a long winter. It was not the kiss of a rescuer and the rescued. It was not born of pity or desperation. It was the kiss of two people who had walked through loneliness and shame and closed doors and had chosen at last to stand still beside each other. When we drew apart, her forehead rested against mine and her breath trembled. "My family sent me here to punish me," she said so softly the words were almost lost between us. "But they sent me to the first place where someone saw me as myself." I pulled her closer, arms around her, feeling the solid warmth of her back beneath my hands. "Then stay with me," I answered. This time she did not smile because she was surprised. She simply nodded as if the words had finally found the place they were always meant to rest. And so the story that began with an orc girl standing alone in the rain at the coach station ended, or rather truly began, with her planting seeds for the new season in the soil outside our house. The wooden case stayed in the corner. The second cup stayed on the shelf. The cloak stayed on its hook. From now on, this was no longer my house. It was ours.